All right. We have spent a lot of time, I think, studying and looking at very, very famous African Americans. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. I know in other classes you've talked about Katherine Johnson, Martin Luther King, and we've all heard about them. We've read about them. We know a lot about them. But the thing is there are so many stories out there that are quieter about African Americans who aren't as famous. And these hidden stories really do hide some very inspirational things, and they really don't showcase just how influential some of these individuals were. And Dr. Alexander Augusta is one of those folks that I believe is not only very inspirational, but should probably move way, way, way up on the list of famous African Americans. He was born, and this is very unlike most of the people that we've studied. He was not born a slave. He was actually born to free parents in Norfolk, Virginia. And since he was like tiny, he knew exactly what he wanted to be. And there's some of you out there that are like that. You've known ever since you were like 4 or 5 what you wanted to do when you grow up, and you've spent your whole life working towards that. And he wanted to be a doctor. No questions about it. He wanted to be a doctor. And he spent most of his life working towards that goal. And he'd even work in like barber shops and stuff to kind of earn extra money as he was working his way towards that. But at the time, being a doctor for a black man at that time was something that just typically didn't happen. And so, again, we remember the laws at this time. Number one thing that would make it really hard is you weren't allowed to read and write. Not just for, it wasn't just slaves. It was like African Americans in general weren't, it was against the law for them to read and write. But he learned how to read and write, which was the beginning of his story. When he, again, like I said, when he was younger, he moved to Baltimore, Maryland, and he worked at a barber shop while he was trying to get his education. He wanted to go to the University of Pennsylvania. However, they wouldn't take him. And it wasn't because he didn't have good grades. It wasn't because he didn't get on the right committees when he was in high school. They did it because of his race. It was because he was black. There was a faculty member, and this is a little different than when you had like slave owners or like the wives of slave owners teaching someone to read. He wasn't a slave. So when this person that was at the University of Pennsylvania took interest in him and helped him learn and taught him privately, I think this is an instance where we can say that was a very kind act. The other times we've said it's not, you can't own a slave and teach them to read and then be considered kind. This is a situation where I think we can say someone was actually performing a kind act. In 1847, he married a lady who was a Native American. And they had to move to somewhere that was a little bit more tolerant of black people and of Native Americans. And so they moved to Toronto, Canada. It was in Toronto, Canada, where he was accepted to the University of Toronto, where he earned his degree as a medical doctor. He was actually appointed the head of the Toronto City Hospital. And not only that, he was in charge of a school as well. So he had a lot on his plate, and he was doing a lot with his life, and he had achieved one of his dreams of becoming a doctor, which is pretty awesome. However, as he lived in Canada, looking south at America, he noticed that things weren't quite right. So we're going to come back to Canada soon, but I want to kind of move around what happened there and then go to America. Then we'll time travel back into some of the things he did in Canada a little bit later. But he's looking south and he's realizing, wow, things in America just aren't great at all. They weren't great when I was there, and they're kind of getting worse as we were moving into the Civil War. He was very much against slavery. He was an abolitionist, we could say that, because he was for abolishing slavery. And he went back to Baltimore at the beginning of the Civil War, and he wrote the president a letter. And you'll get to see, I think maybe in the video, a little bit of the letter. If not, we'll watch that in class. a little bit of the letter where he basically wrote Lincoln and was saying, I really want to serve in the war so that I can serve my brothers and sisters of color to make sure that they're being taken care of in the war. And he was granted that. He received a major's commission as the head surgeon in the Army, which was at the time the highest ranking African American officer. And I think here is where you're thinking, hey, this story is great. And this is where things kind of took a turn for the worse for the most part. To begin with, they only paid him $7 a month as he was in the war. And the thing about that that's kind of crazy is that's a lower pay than the lowest soldier that was white in the Union. Again, I kind of like this guy. He loves writing letters to get things taken care of. So he wrote another letter to a senator and was like, "Hey, this pay thing's not right. I'm a medical doctor. I went to school. I'm here serving, and I have a different rank. Yet you're not paying me the appropriate amount of money for being a commissioned officer." And he got his pay raised. However, the soldiers and the other surgeons that he served with in the Union, okay, this is not even in the South, this is in the Union, complained. Why did they complain? They didn't like the fact that a black man had a higher rank than them, and they did not want to take orders from him at all when his orders were, hey, can you go take care of that person over there that's hurt? Hey, can you go into that tent and take care of this person that got shot? They didn't want to do that. Why? Because a black guy was telling them what to do. So that's insane. It gets worse. He was assaulted by people for wearing a Union uniform in Baltimore. So here we are. We're in the North. And the North is, again, they're fighting against slavery. But apparently treating African Americans with respect. Like, I'll fight. I'll go to fight to make sure you're free, but I'm certainly not going to treat you as an equal or with respect. That's not happening. That's unheard of. I don't understand that logic at all. How would you go to a war where you have the possibility of dying? Like, you're putting your life on the line so that someone can be free, but them being treated as an equal and having rights and being treated with dignity and respect is something that I can't do that. That's not happening. I don't understand that logic at all. But I really think looking at the things that were happening here, the lower pay, people not liking the fact that an African American had a job, especially a job that was above them, being assaulted in Baltimore for wearing a uniform. All of these things, if you look at it, I really think it sets up the struggles that African Americans would have after, like post Civil War. I think you're getting a glimpse into the future here. It's some foreshadowing, if we're talking some ELA terms, of the things that are about to happen. We've seen this a lot. Just as you think you're turning the page on something good, a bunch of bad things happen. So you know that the North wins the war, and you would think that that's going to turn a page into some better things happening, and it just doesn't quite work out that way. When he had to leave the Army because everyone started complaining that they were getting orders from a black guy, he took a train when he left Baltimore, and when he did that, there was segregation on the train. They had train cars that were for white people and train cars that were for black people. And he did not like this. Guess what he did? He wrote another letter. He wrote another letter and protested the fact that he was being segregated when he was on that. Later on, again, like I said, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel, the highest ranking black officer in the U.S. military. And I do have to wonder if his story was any kind of an inspiration for Rosa Parks at all, who much later, well, not really much later, but later on would start to protest the segregation on buses. and I have to wonder if somehow she read his story and if that somehow inspired her. I'd love to look that up. I need to dig a little deeper into that story and find out. So after the military, he was in charge of the Lincoln Hospital in Savannah, Georgia, until he started his own practice in Washington, D.C., and this is the second time that he owned his own place, which is kind of cool. He became one of the first medical professors and one of the original faculty members. And this would be another, I think, really interesting thing to look up and probably a pretty awesome podcast for us. Is he was at this newly formed medical college called Howard University. Now, we could probably spend an entire lesson talking about Howard University, and maybe we'll have some time later on in fourth quarter, once we get some things with science and other social studies subjects taught, we can go into this. But I think this is really neat that he was one of the original faculty members at Howard University. And I think that's a really massive thing. Now, again, starting off, Howard University did not make a lot of money. Colleges need a ton of money in order to sustain and be successful. However, he remained there until 1877. He worked at the smallpox hospital, at Freedman's Hospital in D.C. However, he was never given the recognition of being a physician by the American Medical Association, although he had graduated from Toronto. This encouraged and inspired so many young black medical students to keep on keeping on because he had gone through it all. And I would say that still, even at Howard, this is probably something that inspires many of the students that choose to go there. I would imagine his story and many others are things that inspire them not only to go to Howard, but to keep on keeping on, even in the tough times. He died in 1890, which, if you do the math, is really not that long ago, kids. 1890, I know it sounds like it's a long, long time ago. It's like 130 years. That's really not that long ago. And he was the first black officer to be buried in the Arlington National Cemetery. I've been there before. I did not know that. I probably walked past his grave, but the next time I am there, I am most definitely finding his tombstone so I can stand there for a few moments and pay my respects. I think that's something I'll be looking for the next time I take a trip to D.C. Whoa, I went a little fast there. So we get it. He was an important person in United States history, a very important African American in United States history, but we haven't even heard the things that he did when he was in Canada. Remember I said we would be coming back? We're looping back. So we got to go back to when he first moved to Toronto with his wife, who was a Native American. Obviously, that probably wasn't a very popular couple at all. And people treated them pretty horrible, except for in Toronto, where, again, when I say they were a little more understanding, it was still not a great place. It had tolerance, but I'm not saying it was the most perfect place. And you'll see that with some of the stuff that he had to do. They really did well there. His wife had her own store, and he opened up an apothecary, which is kind of like a drugstore on Yonge Street. Now, if I ever get to go to Toronto, this is one of the things I want to look for to see if there's something there memorializing this. I'd love to see if like there's still a store there or a museum or something. And this helped them survive and honestly make a good amount of money for them. And the neat thing is on the very next slide is an actual newspaper advertisement about his apothecary, and it's kind of inviting the community to come there. So let's take a look at that. Look at this new drugstore, right? AT Augusta begs to announce to his friends and the public generally that he has opened the store on Yonge Street, one door south of Elm Street. The new and choice selection of drugs, medicines, patent medicines, perfumery, dye stuffs. This is amazing. Like, this is an actual newspaper clipping. I think the only thing that tops this is if you watch the video at the end of all of his slides, they actually have the medical book that he used when he was in the war, and that is mind-boggling. During his time in Toronto, he was an active member in the community, and he took a very, very special interest in helping African Americans. He was the president of the Association for the Education of Colored People of Canada. He spoke out about racial injustices, and he actually didn't just sit there and talk. He put his feet to walk, and he walked the walk and talked the talk. He drafted a resolution for the Canadian Parliament, and he opposed someone that was anti-black that was running for the Parliament. And he actually decided he left his all-black church, showing that anytime that there was segregation, that he didn't believe in it. I think that's pretty amazing to do that. Um, Dr. Alexander Augusta, pretty amazing guy. Hope you enjoyed it, and be sure to watch the video after this. Later.